and how as this young university student in America, I had bowed to the disenchanting power of those materialist neuroscience teachings in my courses in biology and psychology. I mean, my teachers told me it was true, and I bought it. And I relinquished my sense of enchantment and my search for the sacredness in life, taking on board those worldviews of my professors as the only acceptable view of a young scientist. And again, it was about 12 years passing before another very powerful and expansive experience in that meditation opened me up to the possibility that the world was indeed enchanted. So my university professors rationally talked me out of it, and then the experience brought me back into it. And so that event catalyzed the beginning of then this exploration of the new worldview and the synchronicities, which then became a part of it, part of this really whole new awareness of the world that really fills me with joy now when I interact on a day-to-day basis with others in the world as I watch this invisible orchestration happening around me.
Welcome to Connecting with Coincidence. I am your host, Bernie Beitman, and we talk about coincidences in very different forms because they come in different forms with different names and different perspectives. Today, we're going to do synchronicity in a fullness that we don't get the opportunity to do very often. We're going to talk with the primary editor of a book called The Playful Universe, Synchronicity and the Nature of Consciousness. And you may have remembered seeing Marjorie on a previous podcast. I like one of my favorite things is how she met her husband, and it's a very romantic synchronicity and stuff coming together. So I hope you look back at that. But today we're going to talk about Marjorie being the primary editor, the first editor of this book, The Playful Universe, Synchronicity and the Nature of Consciousness. A little background on Marjorie first. She was a professor and chair of the Department of Human Physiology and is a member of the Institute of Neuroscience at the University of Oregon. She is president of the Academy for the Advancement of Post-Materialistic Science, which means after we recognize that consciousness is more primary than materialism. She's on the science committee of the Institute of Noetic Sciences, co-director of the Galileo Commission and research director for the International Association of Near-Death Experience. Marjorie is remarkably accomplished academically. So she was caught in that materialistic, do this organized way, thinking that mind comes from brain. But you'll see that ain't the Marjorie we're talking about today. We're talking with today. 200 scientific articles, several books that have to do with consciousness, including Spiritual Awakenings. Scientists and academics describe their experiences. So Marjorie, you somehow got to be, for good, better or worse, the primary editor of this book, The Playful Universe. And it's about the universe and consciousness and synchronicity. And who came up with the playful universe thing? Where'd that come from?
Well, I'm going to actually take you way back to the first part of my life, which leads up into how this happened, and then we will go from there. So
did I think you were going to answer my question directly? No.
Of course not. There's always a great journey. So here's the journey. So when I was young, I have to admit that I had a great sense of the mystery and also that sacred quality of the universe. But then I was trained, as you mentioned, as a neuroscientist in graduate school, according to the materialist worldview, which is still prevalent. And in my career, I did research in rehabilitation medicine related to stroke, to aging, and to childhood diseases. And because of that view, the word synchronicity really had no meaning for me in my life as a neuroscientist. It was all just random chance. I thought that it was simply that word. Well, it's a chance coincidence when something like that might come to my perspective in my world. But then in my 1930s, as I mentioned to you once before in my last podcast, I had a spiritual awakening at a meditation retreat. And I found a connection to this deep level of my inner being that I didn't even know existed before. And then as I continued to meditate, my life began to transform, and what seemed like chance occurrences led me to wonderful new friendships and to whole new paths in my career. And as you said, to meeting my own husband, who I've been married to for like 36 years now. So a few years ago, I was invited to be a part of a group of scholars with David Lorimer of the Galileo Commission. And in fact, you were one of that group of scholars interested in the meaning of synchronicity. And David Lorimer reminds me that these conversations he had been having in the Scientific and Medical Network in England since the 1990s. He's been interested in this that long. And when I joined that conversation, and then I looked back on my recent life, I found I had many synchronicities that were quite profound that had occurred since that first meditation awakening. And of course, they might have occurred before that, but I had no context to put them in. And so I was profoundly surprised and moved by that. And I began to see the specifics of the work of a mysterious force in my life that seemed to be part of this infinitely interconnected consciousness that we're all a part of. So in our synchronicity group discussions, we began to explore our own worldviews on the type of universe that might make synchronicity possible. And I realized that it would be wonderful to share our understandings, not only with each other, but also as part of a volume. And since, as you mentioned, I'm the president of the Academy for the Advancement of Post-Materialist Sciences, the AAPS, and we edit volumes on such topics, and I'm typically the primary editor as the president, I suggested with David Lorimer and Gary Schwartz that we invite our team and also other leaders in the field to contribute to that volume. And what I found out is that then reading those contributions as the primary editor and also the associated worldviews of the authors, I found them fascinating. And they also confirmed my own worldview, but also expanded it with nuances that other authors had shared.
Well, now, I'm glad you did that because you made this happen. It was your fault that this book came out. I mean, your responsibility, because you've been doing this anyway, and I didn't know that. And
Yeah.
so this was another of a series of consciousness related books that you have edited. So that's
Yes.
how it started. You initiated that, and David Lorimer of the Scientific and Medical Network is another editor, and Gary Schwartz is the third editor in this book. And I still want to know, how did you come up with the playful universe thing?
Well, the title actually came from the fact that when I was writing my own essay, which is in the book, I got to the point of what sort of a universe would you believe is able to actually allow and, in fact, create synchronicities? And my own background comes from a philosophy from Asia that is really based on idealism or non-dualism, as we might say, which is basically saying that consciousness is fundamental to the universe. And consciousness, before all this universe existed, said, I want to know myself. I want to really understand who I am. And the way I can do that is to create billions and trillions of individual points of consciousness who can begin to know themselves through this creation. And therefore, the universe is a playful universe because it's about consciousness simply playfully wanting to know itself and have a playful experience within this paradise, this garden that it has created to know itself better. So to me, that's what this is all about. And the synchronicities are part of that play of getting to know each other and the mystery of the way that we co-create the universe with the other consciousnesses around us because we're intimately entangled with one another.
This idea of the universe wanting to get to know itself. I first saw that from physicists in the 1930s, and it's that drumbeat of that phrase is getting louder in my perspective where I am. I'm just hearing different people who don't know each other saying this is it's kind of believed to be a fact of reality.
Yeah.
And how come you, as a scientist who looks for evidence, how come you believe that this is the universe conscious, however we mean those things, trying to get a reflection back on itself. How have you come to believe that?
Well, I think that I will even quote Dean Radin, who is on our board of the executive of the AAPS. In a recent meeting we had, he says the way most people get this understanding is through direct experience. And I have to admit that, hey, that's interesting, those
That's very
explosions
interesting.
behind me, um, through direct experience. And I think that that is a key point, that in fact, I was a materialist neuroscience scientist and had a very, what I would call almost dead view of the universe until I had that spiritual awakening. And suddenly, as you recall in our podcast together, I had this feeling when I had this awakening of this energy in my heart, like exploding outward through my body and the universe. And this feeling came to me, and these words came to me: I'm home. I'm home. My heart is my home. That was the first time in my life I'd had an experience like that. And also this sense of interconnection with the universe. And I think what then happened is that that awakened a curiosity in me to understand what on earth that feeling and that sense of interconnection was about. And then I began reading more. I began turning inside and meditating more. And every experience I had led me toward that final understanding that consciousness is fundamental to all of our beings. And it is both transcendent, meaning it came before the creation of the material world, but also immanent in every single one of us, in every part of the universe. And it's enjoying its play. And I think the thing that's key for me, when people say, but what about the suffering of the world, the fact that there's life and death and those sorts of things that happen, I say, if we can take a perspective that's beyond our individual separate self and see that we are all connected, and we're simply going back and forth across this veil of what we call life and death, and we never really die when we go back across the other side of the veil, we can see the playfulness of it. And that the key issue for me about the universe is that I'm here to learn about myself and the nature of this consciousness. And learning only happens when you actually have, what would I say, like challenges to your belief system. And if we had a universe that was only full of pleasure, 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 we would never really learn anything. And that's part of the contract, so to speak. When I come onto this side of the veil, it's like, okay, I'm here to learn, and I'm going to accept the challenges so that I can actually enjoy understanding what this is about and also be part of the play instead of being afraid of it. It's like, oh, it's just play. And I can come back again and again to learn more as part of the play. I can relax believing that this universe is actually holding me in a trusting place and taking care of me as I learn.
Play to me is fun and learning wrapped up together. And I think you're already saying that. But I'm
Yeah.
going to try to ask you the same question again because you didn't answer it.
Mhm.
Except by experience. That was
Mhm.
your answer.
Yeah.
To me, if you're telling me that the universe is looking at each one of us to interact with each one of us to learn about itself, in order for you to say that, it seems to me you have to be outside of both the universe and us individually to be able to see that dynamic interaction between the universe and us individuals. And I don't, getting outside of that is a major leap of consciousness.
It is. When you say that I hadn't answered the question, I think it's because I consider experience to be the heart of what, in fact, Jeffrey Kripal from Rice University calls in one of his books, the flip. We go from a materialist worldview that we're all separate and consciousness is basically a result of the activity of neurons in the brain. When the brain dies, we die, et cetera, to one in which, with a spiritual awakening of one sort or another, could be a near-death experience, could be psilocybin, could be meditation in my case, something happens and you see things differently and you have an ineffable knowing that the universe is interconnected and your heart opens and a love comes out, a sense of absolute joy in what is all around you. And I will give you just the quick example of Federico Fagin, who I hope people will read. First, he has a first book out called Silicon, a recent book that came out a few months ago called Irreducible, which is about how he started out as a physicist, invented the microprocessor in Silicon Valley, is now a billionaire. And at one point, he had a crisis in his life where he was trying to figure out how computers could become conscious. And he finally realized they aren't going to become conscious. But at the same time, he was struggling with really understanding why it was that he had a wonderful family, all the money in the world, success, etc., and he was miserable. And in the middle of the night, he woke up, went to get a drink of water in the kitchen. And while he was drinking that water, he suddenly had this transformative experience of like light gushing out of his heart, like spreading throughout the universe, along with incredible unconditional love. And this feeling that he was both a wave and a particle at the same time within the universe. He was intimately connected with being his wave nature, but also with his individual nature. And that was the flip that helped him start then exploring to try to understand what sort of worldview could actually create this. So I think for me, it was the same thing. First, there was the experience, and then there was the curiosity. So could I now go back and look at the philosophies of the universe and see which one fit best with my experience? And how could I then begin to explain it? And I think most of us that have had those experiences end up coming up with what we would call this idealist view. And when you say, well, you have to be outside of it to see it, I think it's more like once you feel that total connection with everything, you go, oh, that's who I am. I'm not this isolated individual that is constantly having to compete with other things. I'm part of this interconnected whole, and I feel it. I mean, it's a very deep feeling.
Yeah, that interconnectedness, profound when you have it, when you know it, when you can, that inner knowing. And uh, Federico will be on my podcast very soon. So
Great.
I just got his book today. So
Yeah.
it's very pertinent. So
Yeah.
let's go to consciousness and synchronicity. How does synchronicity, as you are editing, have edited this book, how are synchronicity and the nature of consciousness related to each other?
That's a good question. And I think what I might do is also just tell you about a little bit about one of our contributors related to that, because I think he's talked about it. And it's Dr. Rick Tarnas, who wrote, I think, one of the foreword to the book, as well as one of the essays. And he's written a lot on the topic of synchronicity and consciousness in his previous book that he calls Cosmos and Psyche, and I highly recommend that. And he introduces synchronicities in this way. What he says is they're observed coincidences in which two or more independent events that have no apparent causal connection nevertheless seem to form a meaningful pattern. And I know you've talked about the definitions, and of course it came from Carl Jung. But what he notes is that on occasion, those patterns may strike an individual as being so unusual that it's challenging to believe that the coincidence was a result of chance alone. And of course, that's what happened to me with that first synchronicity I had related to meeting my husband. It was like my neuroscience side of me 5 years earlier would have said, oh, just chance. But there was no way that I could see that with my current understanding. And it's because those events give us the clear impression of being carefully and invisibly orchestrated. I love that phrase, carefully and invisibly orchestrated. Like we have a team that is within this interconnected universe that is making sure that our intimate desires and hopes of our heart actually are carried out in the way we meet other people and the events that happen to us. And of course, that's what I noted for myself once I had that awakening. And I want to mention too that another contributor, who's Dr. Roderick Main, another person that's written a lot on synchronicity like yourself, talks about something that to me really hit home about our new understanding of synchronicity, really since Jung coined it. And he talks about these different phases of our human understanding of consciousness and the universe. And he says that we moved from what he calls enchantment in our early history to then what he calls disenchantment with the start of our scientific revolution, to then a new phase now that he calls re-enchantment, where many of us, you and me and others, are recognizing that profound entanglement of everything in the universe. That is, that we are all really connected. And I have to say that when I read his words, when I was reading Roderick Mayne's book on synchronicity, I felt this great resonance thinking about my own journey and how, as this young university student in America, I had bowed to the disenchanting power of those materialist neuroscience teachings in my courses in biology and psychology. I mean, my teachers told me it was true, and I bought it. And I relinquished my sense of enchantment and my search for the sacredness in life, taking on board those worldviews of my professors as the only acceptable view of a young scientist. And again, it was about 12 years passing before another very powerful and expansive experience in that meditation opened me up to the possibility that the world was indeed enchanted. So my university professors rationally talked me out of it, and then the experience brought me back into it. And so that event catalyzed the beginning of then this exploration of the new worldview and the synchronicities, which then became a part of it, part of this really whole new awareness of the world that really fills me with joy now when I interact on a day-to-day basis with others in the world as I watch this invisible orchestration happening around me. So I think that journey from disenchantment to re-enchantment has really continued to this day. And I would love to hear, I know you've talked about it in books and on these podcasts, when was that moment in your life that like made you go, wait a minute, I'm an MD, et cetera. I'm assuming that when you were first trained as an MD, you were like me, and then something may have happened.
Thank you for asking. I never had one of those experiences. It's always been very weird being alive, and there's always this fun stuff happening that would seem strange. Uh,
Ah,
it's like when I was 8 or 9 and my dog got lost and we found each other. That was the beginning, but even before that, uh, I recognized that there was something odd about this reality, and that I felt like I was alone when I was second grade when I went to a camp infirmary because I was sick and I came back and nobody recognized me. So I had a sense of existential isolation in second grade. And so there was, and then football, baseball, lots of weird coincidences happened. My next book is going to be about all the stuff that happened to me, but I've never had a spiritual awakening. What
wow.
I've had, and more recently, was an experience of divine love, and
Okay.
that you could say is an awakening, but it was part of a journey to get to a place of feeling the joy, the ecstasy of a connection to divine love, which I have now is around me more than it ever was before. So that was last year. So it was important, but nothing huge because I'd seen so many synchronicities before. Let's
Yes.
let's go back. Let's go back to synchronicity and consciousness because one
Yeah.
of the that's the subtitle of the book.
Yeah.
And I think what you're implying is what we've talked about in our group, is that synchronicity demonstrate that our minds are embedded in our environments, that we're not isolated from what's around us, that we are interconnected. And it's a first step for many people to have that, well, my mind is being reflected in my environment. It's a mirror thing. And this other person is just what I needed, and and I'm needed by that other person. That's one of my favorites. Uh, as you know, what I'm seeking is also seeking me.
Yeah.
I like that one. And some of us have our own patterns of synchronicities. And by the way, I'm using AI to look at patterns in coincidence stories, just as part of looking for that. But there's something in you and in this book that made you want to connect synchronicity and consciousness, the nature of consciousness. So could you tell us what you mean by that connection, but synchronicity and the nature of consciousness?
Yes. I think, first of all, I'm going to take one step back and say I'm going to probably poorly quote something that someone told me that Einstein had once said, and it was like there were, I think, three different views on the universe, and one was that this is just chaotic chance, just happening. There was a big explosion, et cetera, and therefore there's a reason to be afraid of things going on because it's chance and we don't know what's happening, we have no control, et cetera. Another one is that it's more like a neutral phenomenon. Yes, there might have been some creation of the universe, but then if there was some sort of force creating it, it walked away and now we're on our own. And again, it may be good sometimes and bad other times. And then the other one that he said is the third one is that this is a friendly universe. And I love that term. This is a friendly universe. And I think that that is my conception of consciousness, that it is a friendly universe, that we are all interconnected. We are part of the same whole. That allows me to understand then how synchronicities would fit in with that. That within this universe that is friendly, there are all of these other beings in the world that you say that are connecting with us. They want things, we want things, and we're connecting with each other as part of this wonderful magnetism of the way that we can work together to actually co-create the universe in a beautiful way. And to me, that's a critically important concept. And in fact, I'll take another step back and say that one thing I'm beginning to believe more and more is something that has been said throughout many philosophical systems of the world throughout time is we create our own universe through our own beliefs and our own thoughts and our own creativity. And if that's the case, then by my heartfelt wish for something to happen, I am co-creating with someone else that may have a similar heartfelt wish through our entanglement, that particular co-creation to come about. You've told us those stories again, I think in your own essay and some of your books where you see that happening. And so I love that idea. It's a friendly universe. My thoughts and my beliefs are creating it along with the thoughts and beliefs of others. We're all co-creating it. And when I can really understand that, I can be very careful about the thoughts and the beliefs that I actually create because they are going to be played out in my future activities, my future events in my world. And it helps me realize, hey, it's much better to think, oh my goodness, I think I can do this. I think we can solve this challenging problem rather than, oh no, I don't really think it's possible. I mean, the one leads my heart to open, to be curious, to move forward with other people, to connect with those people to make it happen. And if I just say it can't be solved, I'm dead in the water. I mean, it's such an interesting thing about just those two sides of the way in different moments of our day, we can project out into the world what we're thinking.
That's an important idea that we still need to be able to do more with because there's a reluctance to do that collectively, which is what we're going to have to do, I think. Marjorie, why this book? What are you hoping will happen with it?
That's an interesting question. I think what I believe is going to happen, even from just talking to the authors, when we sent out the PDF of the book for them to basically proof and they could read everybody else's chapters, they were amazed at the power in each one of those chapters to affect them. And here's something that I believe happens with books like this. I believe that when the reader reads one essay or another, there's almost like a transmission from the author through those words into that person that awakens them to a new way of viewing the world. And then they say, oh, I remember having that sort of an experience. Oh, that really now sounds more true than my intellect was giving it credit for before. Something happens at a heart level that helps the intellect step aside and helps us see the real truth of what's going on in this world, of these beautiful ways that it playfully is entangled and creating wondrous new challenges and wondrous new playful events for us to grow and to create with each other.
It's the idea of immersing yourself, if you're the reader, in a book filled with excited individuals, excited by the idea of synchronicity and how it has so much potential for changing the way we think about ourselves and think about the world. And yet the most important thing, it starts with the reader.
Yeah.
And I think you're saying that we want to get readers to be able to experience what the authors are doing so that they can be reminded or see into the future when when a synchronicity happens, they can say, "Oh, that's what I've seen before." They can recognize it. They can recognize it. So that's a very important idea. It's a seed for people to expand their understanding and experience of synchronicity.
Well, and I want to maybe even add to that. I know that there was one particular essay in the book by Joan Walton, one of our contributors, and I really felt that come home to me when she shared her story. And I'm wondering if I can share that with
Please
you.
do.
Uh,
Please do.
so, yeah, I think that it will help the readers see the sorts of things that are in these essays. So first of all, I just want to mention that you noted that synchronicities often play this powerful role in our lives during periods of crisis and transformation. And often they appear during some period of personal darkness and somehow helping us out of that. And I think Joan Walton gave a beautiful example of that in her essay. So here is her own powerful account. And it's one related to both her and her daughter. And in this case, they were about to begin this new life together, Joan and her daughter, with her fiance, Jerry, when he suddenly had a heart attack and he died. And she was devastated. And she concluded that if something as awful as this can happen, then surely that's proof that there is no benevolent power giving meaning to life. However, she said something kept nagging at her. And so she spent considerable time contemplating that dilemma. And she began to consider that perhaps there was some meaning in that awful event, but it was beyond her ability to understand, at least at that moment. And she began to think, I need to remain open to the possibility that there is meaning in this event. And she created the hypothesis that his death was meaningful, that there was a purpose behind it, and that one day she would understand it. So she said she would act as if that was true. And she says, a number of years later, my daughter was driving a car over a bridge out in the country in England. And she said, because it was a single lane bridge, it was important to slow down and make sure that no cars were coming in the opposite direction. So her daughter slowed down and then tried to accelerate over the bridge, but her foot wouldn't move on the accelerator. And at that moment, a car came speeding over the bridge, not slowing down or looking for other cars, and zoomed past her. Because of her inability to move her foot and accelerate her car over the bridge, her daughter had avoided a head-on collision. And as the daughter drove on, she realized the significance of what had just happened. She felt her life had been saved because her foot suddenly froze and she couldn't press on the accelerator. And she said a strong sense of Jerry, the fiance, pervaded her daughter's consciousness at the same time. Now, what possible explanation could there be for the occurrence of those two aspects of her experience when she was so occupied with what was happening in that present moment and no time to think and reflect? And what Joan Walton says is, it feels to me to be the strong affirmation that there is indeed a wider reality, which we're not able to see directly from this limited human perspective, but is indeed present with us and is supporting us on this life journey if we are open to the possibility. The fact that, yes, the fiance was there somehow informing her, keeping her foot from pressing down on the accelerator when he was really needed. There was that sense of interconnection, even with the other side. And that story profoundly affected me, partly because Joan Walton was willing to wait to make a judgment about the world and whether it was beneficent or not, and then just watch and see what happened. And with that experience with her daughter, she suddenly felt the presence of her fiance in her life again through that experience.
Beautiful, beautiful. And there are more inspirational stories in the book that
Yeah.
may affect other people in different ways. And we strongly recommend those of you who watch this podcast, all of you are interested in synchronicity in one form or another, to to get the book, and just like you can do with magic books, open up to some page and see what happens. I mean, the beginning, middle, end, just let the vibe go and pick it up and see what stories you run into, because it's likely when you're doing a synchronicity book with a lot of different authors, you're going to find one by this kind of bibliomancy that's going to fit with what you're needing to find in that moment. So take a look at the book, uh, The Playful Universe, Synchronicity and the Nature of Consciousness. And it's been a pleasure again to talk with you, Marjorie. We just talk about Joan. Talk with you, Marjorie, and get a sense for our listeners and our viewers that they can find a book that's going to shine all kinds of lights on their experienced knowledge of synchronicity. And Marjorie, credit to you again for just saying, okay, let's do a book with these guys.
Well, and for me, it's always a joy because I get to intimately read all of these stories and learn more myself. It's always a great heart opening and learning experience. So thank you.
Well, you're welcome. And that's what we want to have happen when we do stuff like this. So you learn something, because again, we're back into the idea of we're here to learn and have a good time.
Yeah.
And learning and fun is play. I think Einstein may have said that play is the best form of research. And I think that's what this book is intending to have people think of. So thank you, Marjorie.
Thank you.
This psychosphere is our mental atmosphere, like a hologram of cosmic consciousness.